Have you ever found yourself sitting or standing and telling yourself, but I'm not qualified to be a caregiver. I have no training, I have no manual, I don't have a book or even a set of instructions. And I'm certainly not certified or prepared for this level of responsibility. If that has ever crossed your mind, let me say that is a real thought. It doesn't mean that you're weak. It means that you have a small idea of the responsibility ahead of you. Maybe you don't know the full scope, but you know enough to know that it's going to change your life. The truth is, caregiving doesn't come with a list of qualifications. It's not like the qualifications that you need when you're applying for a regular 9-to-5. But the qualifications that you need to be a caregiver are courage and love. That's it. Welcome back to the Empowered Caregiver, where caregiving is not romanticized and it doesn't make you think that it's easy. I am your host, Valerie B., and I want to remind you that you are more capable than you think. I know that you may not be a doctor or a nurse. However, do you know that you can care better for your loved one because of your love for them? You might feel unqualified because you don't have a medical degree, and you don't need a medical degree. The doctors or the nurses may tell you what medications to take, but you know your loved one inside out. I remember a time a few years ago that my dad was admitted into the hospital because he had COVID. And of course, they put him in a little tiny room, and I explained to them that he had Alzheimer's and dementia. They gave him medication, and that they wouldn't allow me as his caregiver to go and see about him at all. He was in isolation, quarantine. However, I do recall telling the nurses that about 4 o'clock or after 4 o'clock, my dad would become agitated. He would become irritable. He would become delusional. He may even become a little bit violent or out of control. And that is not something that the doctors or nurses know. They don't know how your loved one will react at a certain time of day, but you do. They gave my dad medications, and I kept telling them, okay, you're going to have to give him liquid, because if you give him a pill, you're going to have to put it in applesauce in a blue cup, because that's how he takes it. You're the expert on the history of your loved one. You know what triggers your loved one. You know what keeps your loved one calm. And these are things about your loved one that no one else knows. A doctor doesn't know. A nurse doesn't know. A hospital does not know that. Most caregivers didn't have a plan. It didn't start off for us with training or a set of instructions from anyone. All you could do, like you do today, is to get onto a group on Facebook and hope that people there can give you the support that you need and give you some ideas. That's it. All you have is genuine love for your loved one's well-being. So the only plan you had was the necessity of caregiving, and you knew that walking away was not really an option. Your loved one may have received a diagnosis that required them to have additional care. Your loved one may have had a fall. Your loved one may have been unable to perform daily tasks like drinking and eating and feeding themselves and getting dressed and grooming. They may not have been able to think clearly anymore, to live that independent life that they were accustomed to. And you, as a caregiver, you realized that your loved one needed you. And you said yes, even though you doubted yourself. And when a caregiver says, I am not qualified, what you're really saying is, I'm aware that I can't walk away. I don't want to leave my loved one alone to handle what's next. I want to do right by them. I take this responsibility seriously. That doesn't sound like insecurity. It sounds like honesty. And let's talk a little bit about that word qualified. Qualified doesn't mean that you know everything. It doesn't mean that you are able to do everything just right or perfect. Qualified doesn't mean that you may not sometimes become overwhelmed. But qualified is being willing to learn. It's paying attention to your loved one's behaviors. It's choosing to keep going even when you're having a bad day. And you're qualified already because you notice things that other people miss. You are the one who advocates for your loved one. You're the one who learns to adapt and improvise and be creative and problem solve on a daily basis. You're the one who shows up when you're exhausted. You show up even when you're stressed. You show up even when you are overwhelmed. That's what makes you qualified. And those are just a few caregiver skills. Remember, they develop with more experience. So you don't need a title. You don't need a certification. You don't even need a degree to have authority to be a caregiver. You are the expert on your loved ones. Remember, doctors can treat illnesses and conditions. Facilities, all they do is follow protocols. But you carry the history. You carry the insight on your loved one. So let's just take a breath for a moment. It's time to replace that old sentence that says I'm not qualified to be a caregiver and change it to I am becoming the caregiver that my loved one needs one day at a time. And remember that here on the Empowered Caregiver podcast, we talk about empowerment. Empowerment but doesn't mean that you never doubt yourself. It isn't about doing more, but it's recognizing how much you already do. And remember that you may not go into it as an expert when you start, but every caregiver grows into this role. You grow into it through trial and error. Yeah, trial and error. You may understand that, okay, it's not good to remind your loved one of what you've already said to them maybe a minute ago. You may have done it the first time, and then the second time you say, oh, I got it the first time. I shouldn't do that. So you grow into the role through trial and error. You may grow into it through questions and making adjustments and making some changes. And then you grow into this role through strength that you didn't even know that you had. So if no one has told you this lately, let me say it. You're not just a caregiver. You're an advocate. You're a protector. You're present. So although that you may not have chosen this role for yourself, you're growing in it and you're rising to it. And that's what empowered caregiving looks like. So don't forget, change the sentence from I'm not qualified to I am becoming the caregiver that my loved one needs me to be. So thank you so much for being here, caregivers. Thank you for honoring your growth, and thank you for choosing to see yourself not as unqualified, but as capable, as growing, as a person who loves, a person who honors their loved one. On the next episode, we're going to talk about how to balance work and caregiving, because some caregivers are still working. I worked for a while, and then I got to the point where I could not work my job while caring for my dad. and I had to quit. So we're going to talk a little bit about that in the next episode. But until next time, remember, you're an empowered caregiver, and it's your presence that makes all the difference. Take care, and we'll talk with you soon.